"Pack your things, you're fired." The sentence cut straight through the quiet rhythm of the kitchen, clean and immediate, leaving no space for confusion to soften it. Nina Jackson froze with her hands still under running water, a plate slipping slightly in her grip before she steadied it. For a second, she didn't turn around. It felt like if she stayed exactly where she was, the words might rearrange themselves into something else, something reasonable, something survivable. She turned anyway. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" Victor Romano stood near the doorway, one hand in his coat pocket. Posture relaxed in a way that made the situation feel even more unreal. He didn't repeat the sentence. He didn't adjust his tone. "You're done here." The words landed harder the second time, not because they were louder, but because they were clearer. Nina stared at him, searching for something behind the calm expression, anger, disappointment, anything that could explain why this was happening. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? If there's a problem, you can tell me. I'll fix it." Her voice stayed controlled, but there was a tightness creeping in, the kind that came from holding too much together for too long. "There's nothing to fix," Victor replied. That was it. No explanation, no context, just a closed door delivered in the most efficient way possible. Nina shut off the water slowly, drying her hands on the towel beside the sink to give herself a second to think. "With respect, I've worked here for 3 years. I've never missed a shift. I've never had a complaint. You can't just..." She stopped when she noticed the 2 men behind him, standing still, watching. Security. Not coincidence. Placement. This wasn't a conversation. This was a decision that had already been executed. Her gaze returned to Victor, sharper now. "You're not even going to tell me why?" For a brief moment, he looked at her directly. Something shifted in his eyes so quick it could have been imagined, but it disappeared just as fast. "You'll be paid for the week. Your belongings are upstairs." Nina let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. Except there was nothing funny about it. "That's your answer? That's all I get?" She shook her head slightly, disbelief settling into something colder. 3 years, and I don't even deserve a reason?" Silence answered her again. She felt it settle in her chest, heavy and familiar, in a way she hated recognizing. Being dismissed, without explanation, being judged, without being heard. It wasn't new. That was what made it worse. "Is this about my record?" she asked, quieter now, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Because I told you about that. I didn't hide anything. I told your people everything when I started." Victor's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "It's not about your record. Then what is it about?" She pressed, taking a step forward without thinking. "Because I'm losing my job, and I need to understand why. I have a right to understand. You're asking questions that won't change the outcome." "That's not an answer," she said immediately. "It's the only one you're getting." The finality in his voice landed heavier than anything else he had said. Nina held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for something that wasn't there, then slowly nodded. Not in agreement, but in acceptance of what this was. "Do you even realize what this job means to me?" she asked, her voice lower now, stripped of everything except truth. "My mother is sick. I have a daughter. This isn't just work, it's how I keep them okay." Victor didn't respond. He didn't look away, either. He just stood there, controlled, immovable. That silence answered her better than any explanation could have. Nina exhaled slowly, something inside her tightening into place. "Okay," she said at last, her voice flattening into something distant. "I understand." She turned back to the counter, placing the towel down neatly, finishing the small action she had started before her world shifted. Then she walked past him without another word. Upstairs, her room felt smaller than usual, or maybe she just saw it clearly now for the first time: the narrow bed, the worn dresser, the single window that never quite let in enough light. She packed quickly, folding her clothes with steady hands, placing each item carefully into her bag. No hesitation, no wasted movement. From the dresser, she picked up a piece of paper Lila's drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a too large sun. She paused, her fingers brushing lightly over the crayon lines, then folded it and placed it on top of everything else. By the time she came back downstairs, Victor was gone. Of course he was. The 2 men remained near the door. One of them opened it as she approached, silent, professional, as if this were just another task to complete. Nina stepped outside, the cold air hitting her immediately, sharper than it had any right to be. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and walked forward without stopping. Behind her, the gate closed with a quiet, mechanical certainty that felt more final than anything that had been said inside. She didn't look back. On the bus ride home, she sat by the window, her reflection faint against the passing city. People moved through their routines, talking, laughing, existing in a world that hadn't shifted the way hers had. Nina reached into her bag, pulling out the folded document she carried out of habit more than hope. The accusation that had followed her for years, the reason doors had closed before she even knocked. She stared at it for a moment, then folded it again, more carefully this time. Justice doesn't always show up when it's supposed to, she murmured quietly, her eyes on the blurred reflection staring back at her. Sometimes it just watches. By the time she reached home, the sun had started to dip, casting long shadows across the street. Inside, her mother rested on the couch, and Leela looked up with a smile that didn't know anything had changed. "Mom, you're early," Lila said. Nina forced a smile, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Yeah," she replied softly. "I am." Later that night, after dinner, after her mother had taken her medication, after Lila had fallen asleep, Nina sat alone at the kitchen table, the quiet pressing in around her. The day replayed itself in fragments, each moment sharper in hindsight, each unanswered question heavier than the last. There had to be a reason. At 8:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Nina lifted her head, her focus narrowing instantly. She stood, crossing the small room in a few steps, and opened the door. Victor Romano stood on her porch. This time, she didn't wait. "Start talking," she said, her voice steady, controlled, but edged with everything she hadn't said that morning, "because you don't get to do that and then show up here like nothing happened." Victor didn't answer immediately. He stepped inside instead, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that carried more weight than it should have. The small living room seemed to shrink around him, his presence too large for the space, too controlled, too deliberate. Nina stayed where she was, arms folded loosely across her chest, not backing away, not inviting him further either. "You're going to talk," she said, her voice low but firm, "or you're going to leave. Those are your options." He studied her for a moment, not the way people usually did, not dismissive, not assessing her like a problem to solve, but like he was measuring something internal, something he hadn't quite decided how to approach. Then he walked to the small table and placed the folder he had brought with him down carefully, aligning it with the edge as if precision mattered even here. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally. "That's an interesting place to start," Nina replied, not moving closer. "Considering you didn't think I deserved one this morning. I couldn't give you one this morning." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You couldn't or you wouldn't." He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he opened the folder and turned it toward her. "Take a look." Nina hesitated for half a second, then stepped forward. The papers inside weren't random. They were organized, highlighted in places, marked with notes. Her name appeared more than once. Her full name, Nina Jackson. Beneath it, details she hadn't seen written together in years. Education, coursework, certifications, dates that belonged to a version of her life she rarely let herself think about. Her fingers stilled on the page. "Where did you get this?" "I had it pulled," Victor said. "Pulled," she repeated, looking up at him now. "You mean you investigated me?" "Yes." The honesty of it didn't soften anything. If anything, it made it worse. Nina let out a quiet breath, her jaw tightening. "You fired me after investigating me? That's your explanation?" "No," he said calmly. "I fired you because of what I found." She let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though there was no humor in it. "So, it is about my record. I told you it wasn't." "Then explain it," she snapped, her control slipping for the first time. "Because from where I'm standing, you went digging into my past and decided I wasn't worth keeping." Victor's gaze held steady. "I decided you were in the wrong position." The words landed strangely, not fitting into the narrative she had already built in her head. Nina blinked, her grip on the folder tightening slightly. "What does that even mean?" "It means," he said, his tone still even, "you were never meant to be working in that kitchen." For a second, she just stared at him, trying to decide if he was serious. You walked into my job, told me I was fired, had security escort me out like I did something wrong, and now you're standing in my house telling me I was too good for the job? I'm telling you, he said, that you've been in the wrong place for a long time. Nina shook her head slowly, setting the folder down on the table with more force than necessary. You don't get to decide that. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know why I took that job. I do, Victor replied quietly. That stopped her. Something in his tone shifted, just slightly. Enough to pull her attention back to him in a different way. Not defensive this time. Not angry. Focused. You lost your previous position after a fraud allegation, he continued. The charges were never formally proven, but the record was flagged. Every application after that was rejected. You took whatever work you could get. Nina felt the air leave her chest, not because the information was wrong, but because of how plainly he laid it out, like it was a set of numbers on a page instead of something that had reshaped her entire life. So you did your homework, she said, her voice quieter now, more controlled. Congratulations. I'm not interested in congratulations. No. You're interested in control. She shot back. You dig into people's lives, decide what they should be doing, and then move them around like it's your right. Victor didn't react to the accusation. I'm interested in capability, he said. And you have more of it than you've been using. Nina let out a breath through her nose, shaking her head again. You think because I went to school once, because I had a different life before everything went wrong, that I can just step back into it like nothing happened? That's not how this works. I know that, he said. That's why I'm here. She frowned slightly. What is that supposed to mean? Victor tapped the folder lightly with his finger. It means I'm offering you a position that actually uses what you're capable of doing. Nina stared at him, the words taking a second to settle into something real. A position, she repeated. You think I'm going to work for you after what you did this morning? I think you're going to consider it, he said, because you don't have a lot of better options. The bluntness of it hit exactly where it was meant to. Nina's expression hardened instantly. That's not a pitch. That's a threat. It's a fact. Silence stretched between them again, heavier this time. Nina looked down at the folder, then back at him, weighing something she didn't want to admit she was considering. What kind of position? She asked finally, her voice measured. Strategic advisory. Victor said. You'd be working directly with me. Reviewing financial patterns. Identifying inconsistencies. Flagging potential risks before they become problems. Nina blinked, caught off guard despite herself. You're serious. I don't make jokes about business. She let out a slow breath, processing. You want me to analyze your operations, she said slowly. After firing me from cleaning your kitchen, I want you to do the work you were trained to do. And why would you trust me with that? She asked, searching his face again. You just told me you looked into my past. You know what's attached to my name. I know the accusation, he said. I also know the numbers don't support it. That made her pause. What? She asked quietly. I reviewed the case, he continued. The financial discrepancies you were blamed for didn't align with your access level. The timeline was off. Whoever put that on you needed someone expendable. Nina felt something shift in her chest, something sharp and unexpected. You're saying I was set up. I'm saying the evidence suggests you were convenient. If this moment hit you, tell me where you're watching from and what you felt when Nina heard the truth. Like this video if you believe justice matters, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that stay with you long after they end. She looked away for a moment, her mind racing through memories she had tried not to revisit. Meetings, emails, the day everything collapsed without warning, the way no one had asked questions. I've spent years trying to tell people that, she said, her voice lower now. No one cared enough to listen. I'm listening now. She looked back at him, studying him more carefully this time. Why? Victor didn't answer immediately. For the first time since he had arrived, there was a brief hesitation, subtle but real. Because I need someone who sees patterns the way you do, he said finally. And because you deserve a chance to prove what you've been saying. Nina let that sit for a second, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the folder. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the window before fading again. And firing me was part of that plan? She asked. Yes, that's a terrible plan. It was effective. She almost smiled at that, but the feeling didn't quite reach her face. You don't get to decide what's effective when it comes to my life. I made a decision based on the information I had, he said. You can decide what to do with it now. Another silence, this one less hostile, more uncertain. Nina looked at the papers again, at her name printed in clean, official type, at the version of herself she had buried under necessity and survival. My mother is sick, she said after a moment. My daughter depends on me. I can't afford to take risks that don't pay off. This pays, Victor replied, more than you were making, and it's structured legally. And what's the catch? There isn't one. Nina met his eyes again, skepticism clear. There's always a catch. Then consider this one, he said. If you're right about what happened to you, this gives you the position to prove it. That hit differently, not because it was persuasive, but because it was true in a way she hadn't expected. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing just slightly. I'm not saying yes, she said. I didn't ask for an immediate answer. She nodded once, more to herself than to him. Good. Because I need time to think. Victor inclined his head slightly. Take it. He turned then, moving toward the door as if the conversation had reached its natural end. Nina watched him go, the weight of the folder still under her hand, the future he had just placed in front of her heavier than anything she had carried out of that house that morning. At the door he paused, glancing back once. You were right about one thing, he said. Nina raised an eyebrow slightly. What's that? You did deserve an explanation. Something in her expression shifted, just a fraction. Next time, she said quietly, start with that. He didn't respond to that. He just nodded once and stepped out into the night. Nina closed the door behind him, leaning back against it for a second longer than necessary. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. Nothing did. On the table, the folder remained open, her name staring back at her like a question she hadn't decided how to answer yet. And for the first time since that morning, Nina Jackson realized the day hadn't taken something from her. It had handed her something she wasn't sure she was ready to hold. Nina didn't sleep much that night. Not because the house was loud, it wasn't, but because her mind refused to settle into anything resembling rest. The folder stayed on the kitchen table long after Victor left, open at first, then closed, then opened again as if the truth inside it might change depending on how many times she looked. Around midnight, she made a cup of tea she didn't finish, stood by the window longer than she needed to, and eventually sat back down, flipping through the pages one more time, slower this time, reading every line like it mattered. It did matter. That was the problem. By morning, the light came in thin and pale through the curtains, and Nina was already awake, sitting at the same table, her hair pulled back, her expression quieter but sharper than the night before. The house moved around her in small, familiar ways. Her mother coughing lightly in the next room, the creak of the hallway floor. When Lila padded out half awake, rubbing her eyes. Mom? Lila climbed into the chair beside her, leaning against her arm. You didn't sleep. Nina glanced down at her, softening just slightly. I slept enough. That means no, Lila said, with the blunt certainty only a child could have. Nina almost smiled. Go wash your face. I'll make breakfast. It was simple again, eggs, toast, a glass of milk split carefully so there would still be some left for later. Her mother took her medication with a quiet thank you, the kind that carried more weight than the words themselves. Nina watched them both, the rhythm of their morning grounding her in a way nothing else could. This was what mattered. This was what everything came back to. After Lila left for school, and her mother settled back onto the couch, Nina returned to the table. The folder was still there, waiting. She opened it again, but this time she wasn't looking for proof. She was looking for intention. Victor hadn't needed to do any of this. He could have fired her and walked away. He could have left her exactly where she was. Just another name in a system that had already decided she didn't matter. Instead, he had shown up at her door with information no one else had bothered to uncover and an offer that didn't make sense unless he believed it did. That didn't make him trustworthy, but it made him deliberate. Nina leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. You don't make a move like that unless there's something behind it, she murmured to herself. And you don't investigate someone this thoroughly unless you need them. The thought settled in differently this time, not as a threat, as a possibility. She stood, walked to the sink, rinsed her cup, then returned to the table and closed the folder with more finality than before. The decision wasn't fully formed yet, but it was moving in one direction. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at the door again, not the same as the night before. This one was lighter, familiar. Mrs. Henderson from next door stood on the porch, a covered dish in her hands, and a look that said she already knew something had changed. "I saw you come home early yesterday," she said as Nina opened the door. "Figured I'd check in." Nina stepped aside to let her in. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Mrs. Henderson replied, setting the dish down on the counter. "That's why I did." They sat for a few minutes, the conversation moving the way it always did, small things first, neighborhood updates, a mention of the weather turning colder. Then Mrs. Henderson's gaze settled on Nina more directly. "You lose the job?" Nina didn't answer right away. She had always liked that about her neighbor, no pretending, no circling around what was obvious. "Yeah," she said finally. "Yesterday morning." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "They give you a reason?" "No." Another nod. "That usually means it wasn't about you." Nina glanced at her, a faint frown forming. "That's one way to look at it." "It's the right way," Mrs. Henderson said simply. "People who do things like that already made up their minds long before they said the words. You just happened to be where the decision landed." Nina considered that, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. "What if it wasn't just about the job?" she asked. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow slightly. "What do you mean?" Nina hesitated, then reached for the folder, sliding it across the table. "He came back last night." "That man?" Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted immediately, sharper now. "Yeah." Nina watched her reaction carefully. "He says he looked into my past. Says I was set up. And now he's offering me a different position." Mrs. Henderson opened the folder, scanning the pages with a practiced eye. "And you believe him?" "I don't know," Nina admitted. "That's the problem." Mrs. Henderson closed the folder after a moment, tapping it lightly with her fingers. "You don't have to believe him," she said. "You just have to decide if the opportunity he's offering is worth the risk of finding out." Nina let that sit for a second. "It's not just risk for me," she said quietly. "If I get this wrong, it affects my mother, my daughter." "And if you don't take it?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Nina didn't answer, because that question had an answer she already knew. Mrs. Henderson gave a small nod, as if that silence confirmed what she needed to hear. "Then you already know what you're deciding between. It's not safe versus dangerous. It's stuck versus moving." Nina leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," Mrs. Henderson said. "It's just clear." After she left, the house felt quieter again, but not in the same way it had the night before. There was something else in it now, something shifting forward instead of holding back. Nina picked up her phone, staring at the blank screen for a moment before pulling up the number Victor had used. She didn't call right away. She let herself sit with it, making sure the decision wasn't coming from panic or pressure or fear. When she finally pressed dial, she kept her voice steady. He answered on the second ring. "Yes." "I'm not saying yes yet," Nina said immediately. "But I'm not saying no either." A brief pause on the other end, not surprised, just listening. "What do you need?" "Clarity," she said. "If I'm going to consider this, I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into. Not the version you think I can handle, the real version." "You'll get it," he replied. "And I set the conditions," she added. "Clear boundaries, defined compensation, no surprises like yesterday." "That's reasonable." Nina nodded to herself, even though he couldn't see it. "Then we meet, somewhere neutral." "Name the place." She glanced around the room, grounding herself one more time in what she was protecting, what she was risking. "Downtown," she said. "Late afternoon." "I'll be there." The line went quiet after that. Nina lowered the phone slowly, setting it back on the table. For a moment, she just sat there, hands resting flat against the surface, feeling the weight of what she had just done settle into something real. She hadn't accepted, but she had stepped forward, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like the beginning of something she had chosen, not something that had been decided for her. The cafe sat on the corner of a quieter street downtown, the kind of place that had survived decades by not trying to impress anyone. Dark wood, worn booths, the low hum of conversation blending with the clink of ceramic cups. Nina arrived 10 minutes early, not out of habit but out of necessity. She needed the time to settle herself, to walk into this meeting as someone making a decision, not someone reacting to one. She chose a table near the window, back to the wall, where she could see the door. Old instincts, sharpened by years of needing to stay aware of her surroundings, settled in without effort. A waitress in her 50s came by with a polite nod and a voice that carried the easy familiarity of someone who had seen every kind of day walk through that door. "Coffee?" "Yes, ma'am," Nina replied, her tone respectful, steady. "Black, please." The waitress gave a small, approving smile. "Good choice," she said, jotting it down before moving off. Nina folded her hands on the table, her posture relaxed but deliberate. Around her, the city moved at its usual pace, people stopping in for a late lunch, others lingering over conversations that mattered or didn't. It grounded her in a way she needed. This wasn't Victor's world. This was neutral ground. That mattered. He arrived exactly on time. Victor Romano stepped through the door without drawing attention, but somehow the space adjusted around him anyway. Not because he demanded it, but because presence like his didn't need to ask. He spotted her immediately, crossed the room without hesitation, and stopped at the table. "Miss Jackson, Mr. Romano," Nina replied, not standing, not offering her hand, but meeting his gaze evenly. "You're on time. I said I would be." He sat across from her, his movements controlled, efficient. No wasted energy, no unnecessary gestures. The waitress returned with Nina's coffee, setting it down before glancing at Victor. "You want something?" "Water," he said. She nodded, already moving. Nina watched him for a second, then wrapped her hands around the warm cup in front of her. "Before we start," she said, "I need to make something clear. I'm here to listen. That's it. I haven't agreed to anything." "I understand," Victor replied. "Good." She took a small sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle her thoughts. "Then start talking. Real version this time." Victor leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "The position I offered you isn't theoretical. I have an active problem. Someone inside my organization is moving money in ways they shouldn't be." Nina didn't react immediately. She set her cup down carefully. "You're talking about internal fraud. I'm talking about controlled leaks," he said. "Funds are being redirected through legitimate channels, masked well enough to pass standard audits. And you haven't found it yet," she said, not as a question. "No. That's why you need me. That's why I approached you." Nina studied him for a moment, her mind already moving through possibilities. "And you think I can see something your people can't?" "I think you see patterns differently," he said. "Your previous case proves that." Her jaw tightened slightly at the mention of it. "My previous case proves I was easy to blame." "It proves you noticed discrepancies before anyone else did," he corrected. "You flagged them. That's why you were in a position to be used." Nina held his gaze, letting that settle. It wasn't comfortable hearing it framed that way, but it wasn't wrong either. "And now you want me to do that again?" she said. "Spot the problem before it surfaces." "Yes." "And if I do," she asked, "then you help me remove it." The waitress returned with his water, placing it down with a quiet, "Here you go, hon," before moving away again. Nina waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. "Let's talk about structure," she said. "If I'm doing this, I'm not working under the table. I'm not invisible, and I'm not disposable." "You'll be contracted legally," Victor said. "Compensation is outlined in the file I gave you." "I saw the numbers," she replied. "They're higher than what I was making. That doesn't make it fair. It makes it necessary." "Then tell me what makes it fair," he said. Nina didn't hesitate. "Transparency. If I'm stepping into your operation, I need access to real data, not filtered reports. I need to know who I'm dealing with, not just numbers on a screen." "That can be arranged. I also set my own working parameters," she continued. "I have a family. I don't disappear into your world whenever it's convenient for you." Victor nodded once. "Your schedule will be respected. And one more thing," she added, her tone sharpening slightly. "No more surprises. You don't make decisions about my life without telling me. What happened yesterday doesn't happen again." A brief pause then. "Understood." Nina leaned back slightly, studying him again. You're agreeing too easily. I'm agreeing because your terms are reasonable, he said. If they weren't, I wouldn't be sitting here. That answer didn't feel rehearsed. It felt measured. Nina took another sip of her coffee, her thoughts aligning more clearly now. Let's talk about risk, she said. If someone inside your organization is moving money like that, they're not small time. They're protected. They have reach. Yes, and if I start digging, I become visible to them. Yes, she nodded slowly. So this isn't just a job. It's exposure. It's controlled exposure, Victor said. You won't be operating publicly. But I'll be involved, she replied. And that's enough. Victor didn't argue that. He just held her gaze. You asked for the real version. That's part of it. Nina appreciated that he didn't try to soften it. It made the decision clearer, even if it didn't make it easier. And what about my situation? She asked. My record. If I do this, I'm not just solving your problem. I'm fixing mine. That's part of the arrangement, he said. If you identify the source of the discrepancy, we'll have the leverage to reopen your case. We? She repeated. I have resources, he said simply. Legal ones. Nina let out a slow breath, leaning back further in her chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the cafe filled the space between them, grounding the conversation in something ordinary despite what was being discussed. You don't trust me, she said finally. No, Victor replied. The honesty didn't surprise her. Good, she said, because I don't trust you either. A faint shift at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile, but not quite. That makes this cleaner. It makes it honest, she corrected. Another pause, this one different. Not tense, just measured. Nina looked down at her cup, then back at him. If I say yes, she said, this doesn't make us allies. It makes us partners with a shared objective. That's it. That's sufficient, he said. She nodded once, the decision settling into place. Then here's where I am, she said. I'm willing to try this. Not because I trust you, and not because I think this is safe. I'm doing it because I don't intend to stay where I've been. Victor inclined his head slightly. That's all I need. Don't mistake that for loyalty, she added. I won't. Nina picked up the folder she had brought with her, sliding it back toward him. Then we start clean. New terms, new structure. No more assumptions. Victor took the folder, closing it with a quiet, deliberate motion. Agreed. Outside the window, the city continued moving, unchanged by the decision that had just been made inside a small corner cafe. But for Nina Jackson, something had shifted again, not taken this time, not forced, but chosen. And that made all the difference. The agreement didn't feel official until Nina saw it in writing. Victor didn't rush the process. And that, more than anything, made her take it seriously. 2 days after their meeting, a driver arrived not to escort her, but to deliver a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal contract, printed cleanly, structured with precision, and reviewed by a legal firm Nina, recognized by name alone. No vague language, no hidden clauses buried in complexity. Compensation clearly defined. Scope of work outlined. Boundaries acknowledged. She read it twice at the kitchen table while her mother dozed nearby, and Lila colored quietly on the floor. Every line mattered. Every word had weight. You're frowning, Lila said, glancing up. I'm thinking, Nina replied, not looking away from the page. Is it a good thinking or a bad thinking? Nina paused, then allowed herself a small breath. It's a careful thinking. Lila nodded as if that made perfect sense, then went back to her drawing. Nina signed her name slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. This wasn't just ink on paper. This was a shift. A line crossed that she wouldn't step back from easily. By late afternoon, she stood outside the building Victor had listed as their primary meeting location. It wasn't the mansion. It wasn't even the penthouse she had expected. This was something else entirely, an office space in a quiet financial district building, understated, professional, intentionally unremarkable. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh paper. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. Miss Jackson? Mr. Romano is expecting you. Of course he was. The elevator ride up was quiet, giving her just enough time to steady her thoughts. When the doors opened, She stepped into a space that immediately felt different from anything she had seen in his world before. Clean lines, dark wood, glass walls, but not cold, functional, intentional. Victor stood near a long table, sleeves rolled slightly, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up as she entered, his expression unchanged but attentive. "You came." "I said I would," Nina replied, walking in without hesitation. "I also signed the contract. So now we both have something to lose if this goes wrong." "That was always the case," he said. "Now it's documented," she countered, setting her bag down on the table. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other, not as employer and employee, not as adversaries, but as two people who had agreed to step into something complicated with their eyes open. "Then let's begin," Victor said. He gestured to the table, where several files were already arranged. Not stacks of paper, but organized folders, labeled clearly, each representing a segment of financial activity. Nina moved closer, scanning the titles. Transactions, internal transfers, external routing. "You weren't exaggerating," she said. "This is structured." "It had to be," Victor replied. "Anything less would have been caught already." Nina pulled one file toward her, opening it without asking. Numbers filled the page, but she didn't read them individually at first. She looked at the pattern, the spacing, the timing. "You've already run audits on this," she said. "Yes, and nothing flagged, nothing that held." Nina nodded slightly, her mind already shifting into a different mode. This wasn't survival anymore. This was analysis. She traced a sequence with her finger, her brow furrowing just slightly. "They're not hiding the movement," she murmured. "They're normalizing it." Victor didn't interrupt. "They're breaking it into pieces small enough to blend into legitimate flow," she continued. "But the timing." She flipped a page, then another, faster now. "The timing is too consistent. Real transactions don't behave this neatly." Victor stepped closer, not crowding her, but near enough to see what she was seeing. "That's what I noticed," he said. "But I couldn't isolate the source." "Because you're looking for anomalies," Nina replied, glancing up briefly. "This isn't an anomaly. It's a pattern pretending to be normal." She pulled another file, aligning it beside the first. "Who has access to authorize these transfers?" "A limited group," Victor said. "Senior level only." "How many?" "Four." Nina let out a quiet breath. "That narrows it." "It complicates it," he corrected. She gave him a brief look. "Only if you're emotionally invested in those four people." That landed, not harshly, but directly. Victor didn't respond right away. Nina noticed, but didn't press. Instead, she kept moving through the data, her focus sharpening with each page. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time blurred in the way it did when her mind locked onto something that demanded attention. She wasn't thinking about the room anymore, or Victor, or anything outside the numbers in front of her. Until she stopped, not dramatically. Just a pause, a stillness that meant something had clicked. "What is it?" Victor asked. Nina didn't answer immediately. She reached for another file, flipped to a specific section, then compared it to what she had already laid out. "They're not just moving money," she said slowly. "They're testing the system." "Testing it how?" "They're pushing small variations," she explained, tapping the page, "seeing what gets flagged, what doesn't, adjusting based on that. This isn't just theft, it's calibration." Victor's expression shifted slightly, more focused now. "So they've been doing this for a while." "Yes," Nina said. "Long enough to learn your system better than you expected." Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't uncertain. It was heavy with implication. "Which means," Victor said, "this isn't external." "No," Nina agreed. "It's someone who's been inside long enough to understand how everything moves." She leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. "You don't have four suspects," she said. "You have one. The others just don't know it yet." Victor watched her carefully. "And you can find out which one." Nina met his gaze, steady, certain. "Yes." Another pause, but this one felt different. Not tension, recognition. "You were right," he said quietly. "About what?" "You weren't in the right position." Nina didn't respond to that directly. Instead, she closed the file in front of her and rested her hands on top of it. "Don't get ahead of yourself," she said. This is just the beginning. But it's progress. It's direction, she corrected. Progress comes when we prove it. Victor inclined his head slightly. Then, what do you need? Nina didn't hesitate this time. Full access to the transaction logs for the last 18 months. Not summaries. Raw data. And I want to meet the 4 people who can authorize these transfers. That can be arranged. And one more thing, she added, her tone firm. No one knows I'm looking into this. Not yet. Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. Nina picked up her bag, but didn't move toward the door immediately. She glanced around the room once more, taking in the space she had just stepped into, not as an outsider, not as someone passing through, but as someone who now had a role here. Mr. Romano, she said. Yes, this only works if you let me do it my way. I hired you for that reason. She held his gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod. Good. As she walked out of the office, the weight of what she had taken on settled in fully. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about his problem. It was about proving something she had been denied the chance to prove for years. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. By the 3rd day, Nina stopped feeling like a visitor in Victor's office and started moving through it with quiet purpose. Not ownership that wasn't hers, but familiarity. The kind that comes when your mind has already mapped the space long before your body catches up. The files had multiplied across the long table, no longer arranged in neat stacks but spread out in a deliberate pattern only she fully understood. Dates aligned with dates, transactions cross-referenced, notes written in the margins in a tight, controlled script that wasted no space. Victor noticed the change before she said anything. He walked in that morning to find her already there. Sleeves rolled, hair pulled back, a cup of coffee gone cold beside her. She didn't look up immediately when he entered. She was tracing something across 2 separate reports. Her finger moving slowly, deliberately, like she was following a thread only she could see. You've been here long, he said. Since 6, Nina replied, still focused. The earlier data sets were incomplete. I needed the full picture. You should have asked for assistance. I didn't need assistance, she said, then finally looked up. I needed time. Victor accepted that without comment. He moved closer to the table, his gaze scanning the layout she had built. What have you found? Nina straightened slightly, pushing one of the files toward him. You were right about one thing. This isn't random. It's controlled, deliberate, and patient. She tapped a sequence of numbers. But it's also personal. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. She pulled another document into place beside the first. Look at the authorization patterns. Not just who signs off, but when. The timing isn't just consistent. It's selective. Certain days, certain hours. That's not system-driven. That's habit. Victor studied the pages, but Nina could tell he wasn't seeing it the way she was. Not yet. It's someone who works within your routine, she continued. Someone who knows when oversight is lowest, when attention shifts, when decisions get pushed through without scrutiny. That still leaves multiple people, he said. Not if you look at the overlap, Nina replied. She flipped to another section, aligning it carefully. These transactions only occur when 2 specific authorizations are possible, but only one of those individuals is consistently present during every flagged instance. Victor's focus sharpened. Which one? Nina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back slightly, folding her arms. Before I say it, I need to be clear about something. He looked at her. Go on. This doesn't stay theoretical once I name them, she said. You don't get to second-guess me halfway through. If I'm right, you act. If I'm wrong, you accept that too. No hesitation. No delay. Victor held her gaze, steady, unflinching. You have my word. Nina studied him for a second longer, then nodded once. Marco De Luca. The name didn't land loudly. It didn't need to. It settled into the room with a quiet weight that shifted the air. Victor didn't react immediately. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. Subtle, controlled. That's a serious accusation. It's a supported conclusion, Nina corrected. He's the only one with consistent overlap across every flagged transaction. His access level matches the authorization patterns. and his schedule aligns perfectly with the timing. Victor's gaze dropped back to the documents, his jaw tightening slightly. Marco has been with me for 15 years. I'm aware, Nina said. He built half of what you're looking at, and that makes him exactly the kind of person who could dismantle it without being noticed, she replied evenly. Silence stretched between them, heavier than before. This wasn't about numbers anymore. This was about trust, history, loyalty. Victor exhaled slowly, his hand resting on the edge of the table. You're certain? Yes. He looked up at her again, searching for hesitation, doubt, anything that would soften the statement. There was none. Nina didn't waver. You ask for someone who sees patterns. This is the pattern. Another pause. Then Victor nodded once, the decision settling into place even if it wasn't comfortable. Then we proceed carefully. Nina tilted her head slightly. Carefully doesn't mean slowly. It means controlled, he replied. She accepted that. Then we need to verify behavior in real time. I want access to live transaction feeds, not just historical data. If he's still moving money, he'll follow the same pattern. Victor considered it for a moment, then nodded. I'll have it arranged. And I want to meet him, Nina added. That made him pause. That's not necessary. It is if I'm going to understand how he operates, she said. Data tells me what he's doing. Interaction tells me how he thinks. Victor studied her, weighing the request. You'll observe, he said finally. Nothing more. For now, she agreed. The meeting was set for later that afternoon. Marco DeLuca arrived exactly on time, just like Victor had. That alone didn't mean anything. But Nina noticed it anyway. Habits mattered. He was older than Victor by a few years, his presence quieter, less commanding but no less controlled. He carried himself like someone who had earned his position, not inherited it. When he entered the room, his eyes moved quickly, taking in the space, the layout, and finally landing on Nina. This is new, Marco said, his tone polite but edged with curiosity. I wasn't aware we were bringing in outside consultants. Nina Jackson, Victor said. She's reviewing our financial structures. Marco nodded slightly, his gaze returning to her. Then I assume you've been busy. Getting there, Nina replied, her tone neutral. She didn't offer more than that. He smiled faintly, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. If you need anything clarified, I'm available. I've overseen most of the internal systems for years. I'm sure you have, Nina said. The conversation moved on, technical, controlled, nothing that would raise immediate concern. But Nina wasn't listening to the words as much as she was watching the spaces between them. The way Marco responded without hesitation, the way he redirected questions just slightly, the way his attention flickered when certain details came up. By the time the meeting ended, she had what she needed. After Marco left, the room felt different again, quieter, but sharper. Well? Victor asked. Nina didn't answer right away. She walked back to the table, picking up one of the files, then set it down again. He's careful, she said finally, but he's not as careful as he thinks. Victor crossed his arms slightly. You're more certain now. Yes. What did you see? Nina met his gaze. He doesn't react to data. He reacts to control. Every time the conversation moved near something he couldn't predict, he adjusted not outwardly, but just enough. Victor nodded slowly. And that confirms it for you. It confirms behavior, she said. The data already confirmed the pattern. Another pause, then Victor spoke again, quieter this time. If you're right. I am, Nina said, not sharply, just certain. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, his attention shifting back to the window, the city beyond it. 15 years, he said, almost to himself. Nina didn't respond immediately. She understood what that meant. Loyalty like that wasn't replaced. It wasn't dismissed easily, but it also didn't erase truth. People don't betray overnight, she said after a moment. They build toward it, quietly. Victor's expression didn't change, but something in the room settled differently. What's next? He asked. Nina stepped forward, her voice steady. Now we prove it in a way he can't deny. The plan didn't begin with confrontation. It began with patience. Nina stood at the long table the next morning, the glow of multiple screens reflecting faintly in her eyes as live transaction data streamed in real time. The system Victor had opened for her was deeper than anything she had worked with before, layered with protections and redundancies that made it difficult for anyone outside to follow. But she wasn't outside anymore. Victor entered without announcing himself, stopping a few steps behind her. "You have access," he said. "I have visibility," Nina corrected without turning. "Access comes when I understand how he moves under pressure." Victor watched the screen for a moment, lines of numbers shifting, updating, evolving. "And how long does that take?" "Not long," she said. "People like Marco don't stop just because they feel watched. They adjust. That's what we're waiting for." Victor stepped closer, his presence steady but restrained. "And when he adjusts, we follow the adjustment," Nina replied. She tapped a sequence on the screen, isolating a cluster of transactions. "He's already slowing down. Smaller movements, longer gaps. That tells me he suspects something has changed." Victor's gaze sharpened. "You think he knows about you? I think he knows something is different," Nina said. "Not me specifically, but enough to make him cautious." Victor folded his arms slightly. "Then we're losing time." "No," she said calmly. "We're gaining clarity. The more careful he becomes, the more deliberate his choices are. And deliberate choices are easier to track." Victor didn't argue. He had learned that much already. Hours passed with minimal conversation. Nina worked in silence, her focus narrowing as she followed patterns across multiple streams, connecting movements that didn't appear connected on the surface. Victor remained nearby, occasionally stepping out for calls, but always returning, as if leaving the room entirely wasn't an option he was willing to take. By early afternoon, Nina's posture shifted, not dramatically, just enough for Victor to notice. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, isolating a new set of data points, aligning them with older records. "He changed the route," she said finally. Victor stepped closer. "Explain." "He's not using the same channels anymore," Nina said, her voice tightening slightly with focus. "He's rerouting through a secondary layer, less efficient, but harder to detect if you're not looking for it." Victor studied the screen, but again, he wasn't seeing what she was seeing. "Can you follow it?" "I already am," she replied. "But it's not just the route, it's the trigger." "Trigger?" Nina nodded slightly. "Every time he moves funds now, it's tied to a specific internal event. Meetings, approvals, anything that creates noise in the system. He's hiding movement inside activity." Victor exhaled slowly. "That's not random." "No," Nina said. "It's defensive." She leaned back slightly, her eyes still locked on the screen. "He's not just stealing anymore. He's protecting himself." Victor's expression hardened. "Then we move now." Nina shook her head. "Not yet." His gaze snapped to her. "We have enough. We have suspicion," she corrected. "You act on that, he denies it. He buries the rest, and we lose everything." Victor held her gaze, tension building just beneath the surface. "And if we wait, he keeps moving money." "For a little longer," Nina said, "but he also keeps making decisions, and every decision narrows the gap between what he's doing and what we can prove." Silence stretched between them, not hostile, but charged. Victor finally nodded once. "How much longer?" Nina glanced back at the screen, then at him. "One more move." Victor's jaw tightened slightly. "And you're sure he'll make it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he has to," Nina said. "People like Marco don't stop when they're close. They accelerate." That answer settled something in the room. Later that afternoon, Nina left the office earlier than expected. Not because she was done, but because she needed distance. The kind that let her think without the constant pressure of data and presence. She walked instead of taking a car, letting the city noise pull her back into something more grounded. By the time she reached home, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the street. Inside, the house carried its usual rhythm. Her mother was awake, watching an old television program, the volume low. Lila sat at the table, working on homework, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "You're home early," her mother said gently. "For a little while," Nina replied, setting her bag down. Lila looked up, her expression brightening immediately. "Mom, I got all my math right today." Nina smiled, walking over and brushing a hand lightly over her daughter's hair. "I'm not surprised." "Are you going back to work later?" Lila asked. Nina hesitated for just a second. Yeah, she said softly. I have to finish something important. Lila nodded, accepting that without question. Okay. Nina moved into the kitchen, leaning against the counter for a moment, letting the quiet settle around her. This was the part that mattered, the part that made everything else worth it. Her phone buzzed. Victor, she answered immediately. What happened? Movement, he said. Just now. Nina straightened. Send it. Seconds later, the data came through. She didn't need long to read it. That's it, she said quietly. That's the one. Then we move, Victor replied. Nina grabbed her bag, her voice steady but firm. No delays this time. There won't be. When she arrived back at the office, the energy had shifted. Not chaotic, not loud, but focused in a way that meant something was about to happen. Victor stood near the table, the screens already displaying the flagged transaction. Nina stepped beside him, her eyes scanning quickly. He didn't just move funds, she said. He consolidated. Victor's expression sharpened. Meaning? Meaning he's preparing to exit, Nina said. This isn't just another transfer. It's a closing move. Victor didn't hesitate this time. Then we end it. Nina nodded once. Now you have proof. Victor turned slightly, already reaching for his phone. Security will handle the rest. Nina watched him for a moment, then added quietly, and Victor, don't underestimate him. Victor paused, looking back at her. I don't, but something in his expression suggested this wasn't just business anymore. It was personal, and that made what came next far more dangerous than either of them had said out loud. Victor didn't make the call immediately. For a man known for decisive action, that hesitation brief, controlled, almost invisible said, more than any reaction could have. He stood with the phone in his hand, eyes still on the screen where the transaction glowed like a quiet confession. Nina watched him, not pushing, not speaking. She understood what that pause meant. 15 years wasn't something you erased with a single piece of evidence. Say it, Victor said finally without looking at her. Nina didn't soften it. If you wait, he disappears. Victor exhaled slowly, then lifted the phone. His voice, when it came, was steady again. Lockdown internal access. No external communication leaves the system, and I want Marco De Luca brought in. Now. A pause on the other end. A confirmation. Then silence. The shift in the room was immediate. Not louder, not chaotic, but tighter, focused. Like everything had narrowed to a single point. Nina stepped back slightly, giving him space, but not leaving. He won't come in easily, she said. He will, Victor replied. He doesn't know how much we know. That's the advantage, Nina said. Don't lose it by showing your hand too early. Victor glanced at her briefly. You think I don't know that? I think this is personal, she said evenly. And personal decisions tend to move faster than smart ones. The words hung between them, not confrontational, just precise. Victor held her gaze for a second longer, then gave a short nod. Stay here, he said. I'm not going anywhere, Nina replied. The next 30 minutes moved slowly, each second stretching longer than it should have. Nina remained near the table, her eyes occasionally returning to the data, not because she needed to see it again, but because it anchored her in something factual, something controlled. When the door finally opened, Marco walked in without resistance. That, more than anything, told Nina he didn't know. He looked the same as before. Composed. Measured. A man who had spent years understanding exactly how to carry himself in rooms like this. His gaze moved first to Victor, then briefly to Nina, lingering just long enough to acknowledge her presence. You wanted to see me, Marco said. Victor didn't gesture for him to sit. We need to talk. Marco gave a faint, almost amused nod. That usually means something's already been decided. It means I'm giving you a chance to explain, Victor replied. Marco's eyes sharpened slightly. Explain what? Nina watched closely. Not just his words, but the space between them. The microsecond pauses. The controlled breathing. The way his hands rested loosely at his sides. Relaxed, but ready. Victor stepped aside slightly, revealing the screen behind him. The transaction data. Clear. Undeniable. Marco looked at it. Not long. Not with surprise. With calculation. That's a serious allegation, he said. It's not an allegation, Victor replied. It's a record. Marco let out a quiet breath, his expression shifting just enough to register that he understood the situation had moved beyond denial. "You've been watching me. I've been verifying," Victor said. Another pause. Then Marco's gaze moved to Nina again, more directly this time. "You," he said, not as a question. Nina didn't react. "Me," she confirmed. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, but it wasn't friendly. "I underestimated you. That was your first mistake," Nina replied calmly. Marco's attention returned to Victor. "And you trusted her over me." "I trusted the evidence," Victor said. "After 15 years, Marco said quietly. "That's what it comes down to." Victor didn't respond immediately. That silence carried more weight than any defense could have. Marco nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he had already known. "You want the truth," he said. "Or you want a version of it that makes this easier?" "The truth," Victor said. Marco let out a small breath, then stepped forward, just enough to close some of the distance without crossing a line. "It started small," he said. "Opportunities, gaps in the system that no one was paying attention to. I adjusted them. At first, it was about efficiency, making things move smoother. And then?" Nina asked. Marco glanced at her briefly. "Then I realized how much was moving through those gaps, how easy it was to redirect without anyone noticing." Victor's jaw tightened slightly. "So you took it?" "I used it," Marco corrected. "There's a difference." "Not to me," Victor said. Marco's expression hardened just slightly. "Of course not. You've never had to think about the difference." That landed, but Victor didn't engage with it. "And the setup," he said, "years ago. The fraud case." Marco's gaze flickered, just for a second. Nina saw it. Victor didn't. "Careful," Marco said quietly. "No," Nina stepped in, her voice steady but sharper now. "Answer him." Marco looked at her again, longer this time. Then he smiled, slow and deliberate. "You really don't know, do you?" Nina didn't move. "Know what?" "That you were never the target," he said. The words hit differently than anything else in the room. Victor's head turned slightly. "Explain." Marco's gaze stayed on Nina. "You were convenient. Wrong place, wrong access level, just enough knowledge to make the story believable. But the system I was protecting," he paused, "that was already in place long before you ever touched it." Nina felt the shift in her chest. Subtle but real. Not shock, not anger. Something colder. "You used me," she said. "I used the situation," Marco replied. Victor stepped forward, his voice dropping. "You framed an innocent person to protect your operation." Marco didn't deny it. "I protected the structure," he said. "The same structure that built everything you have." "That structure is finished," Victor said. Marco let out a quiet laugh. Not loud, not unhinged. Just certain. "You think this ends with me?" he asked. "You think I'm the only one who understands how your system works?" Silence followed that. Nina glanced at Victor, then back at Marco. "You're trying to buy time," she said. Marco's eyes flickered again. "Not denial, recognition. That's your second mistake," Nina added. Victor didn't hesitate this time. He stepped back, his voice controlled but final. "It's over, Marco." The door opened again. Security stepped in. Marco didn't resist. As they moved toward him, he looked at Victor one last time. 15 years, he said quietly. "Remember that when you decide what loyalty is worth." Then he was gone. The room settled into silence again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried aftermath. Victor stood still for a moment, then turned back toward the table, his hand resting against the edge like he needed something solid to anchor himself. Nina didn't speak immediately. She gave him the space, because she understood what had just been taken from him wasn't just a problem solved. It was a history ended. After a moment, he looked at her. "You were right." Nina held his gaze. "I needed to be." Victor nodded once, then glanced back at the screen, now just data again, stripped of the person behind it. "This doesn't end here." "No," Nina said. "It doesn't," because Marco had said something true. And truth, Nina knew, didn't stop just because one person was removed. It had a way of continuing, whether you were ready for it or not. The building felt different the morning after. Not quieter, not calmer, just clearer. as if something that had been sitting beneath the surface for years had finally been dragged into the light, and now everything else had to adjust around that absence. Nina noticed it the moment she stepped into the office. People moved the same way. Conversations carried on in the same measured tones. But there was an undercurrent now. Awareness. Uncertainty. Victor was already inside when she arrived, standing near the window, looking out over the city. He didn't turn immediately when she entered, but he knew she was there. They processed him overnight, he said. Nina set her bag down on the table, her movements unhurried. And the accounts? Frozen. Every route he used is being traced. Victor turned then, his expression composed, but not untouched. He didn't work alone. Nina nodded slightly. He told us that much. He implied it, Victor corrected. He confirmed it, Nina said, just not directly. Victor studied her for a moment. You're certain there are others? I'm certain he wasn't operating in isolation, she replied. Whether that means partners or just people who benefited without asking questions, we don't know yet. Victor walked back toward the table, his attention shifting to the files that remained. Fewer now, cleaner, but not finished. Then we keep going. Nina watched him for a second, then moved to the opposite side of the table. We will, she said, but not the same way. He looked up. Explain. Marco was structured, Nina said. Careful. Predictable once you understood his pattern. Whoever comes next won't be. They'll adapt faster, move less, hide better. Victor considered that. Then we adjust. Yes, Nina said. But we don't chase, we observe. Let them believe the disruption ended with him. Victor's gaze sharpened slightly. You want to make them comfortable? I want them to make a mistake, she replied. A brief pause followed. Then Victor nodded once. Do it your way. That answer came easier now than it would have days ago. Nina didn't acknowledge it directly, but she noticed. They worked through the morning with a different kind of focus. Not urgent, not reactive, intentional. Nina moved through the remaining data, not looking for what had already been exposed, but for what had shifted in response to it. Victor stayed close, not hovering, but present, asking fewer questions, trusting more of the silence. By midday, Nina leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing at a smaller set of transactions. There, she said quietly. Victor stepped closer. Another pattern? Not a pattern, she corrected. An absence of one. He frowned slightly. That doesn't make sense. It does if you think about behavior, Nina said. Marco's activity created a rhythm. Now that he's gone, that rhythm should disappear completely. But it hasn't. Victor looked at the screen again, more carefully this time. It's reduced, not eliminated, Nina said. Which means someone else is still touching the system. Not as aggressively, not as confidently, but enough to show they're still there. Victor exhaled slowly. Then we were right. We were close, Nina said. This confirms it. Another silence settled, but this one carried less tension and more direction. Victor straightened slightly. We move on them. Nina shook her head. Not yet. He didn't argue immediately, but the question was there. Why? Because they're watching, she said. Right now, they're waiting to see how you respond to Marco. If you move too quickly, they shut down completely. We lose visibility again. Victor held her gaze. And if we wait? They think they're safe, Nina replied. And people who think they're safe get careless. Victor nodded slowly. Then we wait. The decision settled between them without resistance. Later that afternoon, Nina left the office at a reasonable hour for the first time since this had started. Not because the work was done, but because she understood something important. Clarity didn't come from constant pressure. It came from knowing when to step back. At home, the air felt warmer, lighter in a way she hadn't noticed before. Her mother was sitting up, a book open in her lap. Lila was at the table again, this time reading aloud, stumbling over a word and correcting herself with quiet determination. You're home early again, her mother said, a hint of curiosity in her voice. For a while, Nina replied, setting her bag down. Lila looked up, smiling. I finished my homework before dinner. Nina walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. I'm proud of you. Are you still working with that man? Lila asked, her tone innocent but observant. Nina paused for a fraction of a second. Yes, she said. I am. Is he nice? The question caught her slightly off guard. Nina considered it carefully. He's fair, she said finally. Lila seemed to accept that, returning to her book. Later, after dinner, after her mother had gone to rest and Lila had fallen asleep, Nina stood in the quiet kitchen, looking out the window. The city lights in the distance flickered softly, steady, and indifferent. Her phone buzzed. Victor, she answered without hesitation. What happened? Nothing, he said. Nina frowned slightly. That's not a reason to call. No, he replied. It's a confirmation. She understood immediately. They didn't move. They didn't move, he confirmed. Nina nodded to herself. Good. A brief pause followed. Then Victor spoke again, his tone quieter than usual. I reviewed your case. Nina's hand tightened slightly around the phone. And? The inconsistencies you pointed out, he said. They're more obvious now that I know what to look for. She didn't respond right away. I've already contacted legal, he continued. We're reopening it. The words settled slowly. Thank you, Nina said, her voice steady, but softer than before. You earned it, Victor replied. Another pause, but this one felt different. Not about business, not about strategy. Get some rest, he said finally. Tomorrow we continue. Nina let out a quiet breath. Tomorrow we continue, she echoed. She ended the call and set the phone down on the counter, her reflection faint in the darkened window. For a long moment, she just stood there, letting everything settle into place. This had started with something taken from her, a job, stability, control, but it hadn't ended there. Now, she had something else, and for the first time in years, Nina Jackson wasn't trying to recover what she had lost. She was building something that had never been given to her in the first place, and that made all the difference. This story reminds us that justice is not always immediate, and truth is not always visible, but neither of them ever truly disappear. Sometimes, the world overlooks the innocent and rewards the wrong people, not because fairness is absent, but because courage is. Nina's journey shows that strength is not loud or dramatic. It is the quiet refusal to give up, even when everything has been taken. And in the end, real power does not belong to those who control others, but to those who choose integrity over fear and action over silence. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.